Hi everyone, we are ready to get started. So thanks for joining us today on at our webinar on the changes that are coming to the Campus Vendor Request System. My name is Anita Collins and I'm the Change Management Lead for the Connect Carolina project. I'm just moderating the session today. Here with me is Chris Minter, who's going to be, you guys may know him as the person who teaches the class on the Campus Vendor Request System. So he's going to talk about the changes. I'm just going to kick us off real quick. So I did want to let you know that we are recording this session today. So it will be available in a day or two on the CC Info website. So it'll be recorded. And that's actually more important than usual for this session because due to the holidays, we wanted to go ahead and have this webinar, but the change is actually not going to be effective until early January, or we're expecting it to be early January. So we wanted to go ahead and let you know about the changes that are coming, but it'll be a couple of weeks until you actually see them. So just remember that the webinar is recorded, so if you want to refresh your memory in January, we'll also remind you when we send out communications about when the change is going to be implemented. We'll include a link to the webinar. Okay, so Chris is going to lead the session. Also here today are Bob Longo. He's the project manager for this effort. And then joining us long distance over the phone is Alexa Hook, who's been key in getting these changes made and knows a lot about the Campus Vendor Request System, among many other things. Okay, so just real quick, one more thing. So we booked this webinar for 45 minutes, but we really expect the actual content to take more like 20 or 25 minutes. We left lots of time for your questions. If we have a lot of questions, we're here and we'll stay for the whole time, but you guys may get out a little earlier than we originally communicated. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Minter.
Okay, thank you, Anita. So like Anita was saying, I'm Chris Minter, and I'm the guy you probably remember from the vendors class, and I teach the purchase recs and all those other classes. So that's me. I'm here today, and so what we're going to talk about is we're gonna actually review some of the vendor classes that you probably are already familiar with. I just want to go over them again in case you haven't been trained in a while, just so you understand the differences between them. And we're going to talk about our new vendor class today, affiliate with PID. And as Anita was saying, these changes aren't already in the system, but they will be coming soon. So if you are going to be requesting vendors today, you're not going to see that option yet. But I'm going to show you some screenshots here of what it will look like so you know what to expect. We're going to talk about what vendor changes you can request and how. I'll do a short little demo of a new vendor request to show you some of the new screens and messages that you'll end up seeing. We'll do a vendor change request as well because it's the similar page, but you're going to get different messages depending on what you're trying to do. And then we'll have plenty of time left at the end for any questions you may have. So here I'm outlining what the key changes are for the campus vendors. So the main change that you're going to see obvious when you log into the system is you're going to see this new vendor class called affiliate with PID. So right off the bat, when you go to request a new vendor, you're going to see that. What's going to be not quite as obvious to you, but it will be in the system is what you're able to change. So bio demo information, which is basically like your address and your phone number. For employees, students, and affiliates, it's going to be fed from the student administration system, and you're not going to be allowed to change that via the vendor request system. So when you go to set up an employee, their address and stuff is always going to already be in the screen for you. So that might be a little bit different than what you were used to. You can request changes to banking information for all vendor types except employees. And employee banking information is going to be, as it always has been, fed from the payroll system. As I said, just to reiterate one more time so you guys don't get confused, these changes aren't currently active. but they are coming soon. Any policies and procedures that are associated with this will be updated when the changes actually take place, and will probably be like on the Finance Division's website and so on and so forth. So just be sure that when these changes go into place, you'll be receiving more information about any changes that might affect how you do your work. So let's talk, as I mentioned before, let's talk about the vendor classes. So some of these you're already going to know. So we have a vendor class called employee, and that's probably one of the simplest ones to know, an employee of the university. The one thing you do want to sort of make sure you understand is while hospital employees have PIDs and they kind of feel like they're university employees, they're right here in the middle of the campus, they're not technically university employees. So an employee is an employee. Whereas students, students are students. And students can be in different stages or different levels of being active. So you've got totally active students who are in class. You've got applicants, people who have been admitted, pre-matriculated, and matriculated. So to qualify as a student, to set them up as a vendor, they need to be in one of those particular states. We have that category, we just call it other, but other is other. Basically, those are going to be your vendors outside the university, and those are going to include most of your independent contractors. So those three things, if you've been working with vendors for a while, pardon me, if you've been working with vendors for a while, those should be familiar to you. But the brand new one, affiliate with PID, that's the one we don't have yet. So, affiliates with PID are basically people who are affiliated with the university in some way and have a PID, but don't actually fall into one of the other classes. And as I mentioned just a minute ago, a prime example of an affiliate with PID is going to be like a hospital employee. You can have volunteers. There's some other types of affiliates. I'm not going to list them all here, but that's generally that umbrella that's covered under that new class. So let's talk a little bit more about employee vendors specifically and what you can and can't do. So with employee vendors, their name, address, phone number, email address, it's all fed from the student administration system. So some people call that campus solutions, but basically that's where all the biodemo information for all the employees is stored, and you can't change it on the campus vendor page. All that stuff, as soon as you go to actually create that vendor, their information will just sort of populate on that screen, and you can't really do anything with it. It's all grayed out. So if you do want to have those things changed, you have to have the employee do it. You need to tell them, hey, you need to make that change in the campus directory. They could go in via self-service in the Connect Carolina portal if they know how to do that. Or, if they, for some reason, can't do either one of those things, they could contact an HR facilitator and they could go in and change that information for the employee. But the main thing is, you cannot change it. You just have to notify somebody, that the change needs to be made. All the banking information that you would normally fill out on that page, that's also going to be fed from payroll. So that's going to be grayed out. And if the employee wants to have his banking account changed for his ACH, that employee needs to contact payroll directly to have them change that information. So that's employees. So kind of switching over to the other familiar class to you, we're going to talk about student vendors. So student vendors, similar to employees, that name, address, phone number, all that biodemo information is going to be fed from the student administration system, and you can't change it in the campus vendor system. Students can go in and they can change that stuff. They can change it through the campus directory, just like employees. They could go through self-service, or they could even contact the registrar's office. The registrar's office has access to make those kinds of changes. The one key difference between students and employees is you can request different payment methods for students because they're not tied to the payroll system like the employees. So subtle difference, but it could make a big difference if you weren't aware of that subtle difference there. Other vendors, that other class that we want to talk about, that includes our independent contractors. Really, there's no changes for the outside vendors. So how the outside vendors work now are pretty much how the outside vendors are going to work whenever this change actually goes into effect. Information for outside vendors is not fed from the student information system. That information is actually keyed in by you when you go to put in the request, or possibly the vendor coordinator would be making changes on the back end on your behalf. You can request changes to an outside vendor's name, address, phone number, and email address, just like you always could. And different than both students and employees, you can request that an outside vendor have maybe more than one address, or one or more payment styles. So they may want sometimes to get paid by ACH, and sometimes they want to get paid by check. Whereas students and employees, you can't really do that. So those are the changes that you're going to see on the classes that you actually are already familiar with. So we're going to move on to the new class that we don't actually have yet. So affiliate with PID vendors, the restrictions on this are going to be very similar to the ones that we have for students. So just like before, all the biodemo information, name, address, phone number, and all that is going to be fed from the student administration system and cannot be changed. So affiliates, the way they'll change that information is you would point them to say, you'd say, hey, go to the campus directory and change it, try changing it in self-service, or they could contact a university HR facilitator to make that change for them. So, you have all different kinds of affiliate types. You never know like how savvy they're going to be or if they know where to go, but you could actually point them into one of those directions to make that change. And like before, you can't actually change it for them, so they have to do one of these other methods. And you can request a payment method, a different payment method for affiliates, so it's not locked down like employees. So all three of those groups, employees, students, and affiliates, they all have PIDs, but they're different based upon the class that they're actually in. Okay, so I'm going to do a little demo of what this is going to look like in the system. Now, I didn't want to take up the whole webinar showing you how to add a new vendor, because everyone here has done that before, but I wanted to highlight some of the changes that will happen when you go to set up the new vendor and what the different screens will look like. Hang on one sec. Sorry, we were just trying to get the sound a little louder. Some people had said they couldn't hear it, which is funny because I'm usually pretty darn loud and I'm talking right in the mic. But we'll make sure it's as loud as it can go. You can always try to crank up your speakers or whatnot. And if you can't hear really well, maybe we can adjust the sound before we post it onto the website. We've got a tech guy who's pretty savvy with this kind of stuff. So I apologize if you can't hear. So back to the demo here. So what I'm going to do in this first scenario is I'm going to go in and do a standard campus vendor request. So I want to set up an employee as a brand new campus vendor. I'm also going to have the knowledge that the person not only is a university employee, but they've also been a student, but they're not a currently active student. So in this scenario, I'm going to see what would happen if I tried to add them as a student before I tried to add them as an employee, just so you get a flavor of what some of the messages that will pop up in your face are, so you won't think you're doing anything wrong. It's actually part of the system to kind of direct you to what you can and can't do. So I showed you just a little menu path here. This should be very familiar to you. The nice thing about this is the menu path's not changing, so you're still going to go to the same place. The screen's going to basically look the same, just a couple minor tweaks. So as you can see on my screen here, I've clicked on Finance, I've gone into UNC Campus, and I've actually selected the Campus Vendor option. So when I get to this screen, this should be pretty familiar to you. I need to choose, well, they call it on the screen, they call it the vendor type, but this is the actual vendor classes that I was talking about. So when I click that drop down off to the right in that orange box, I'm going to see those vendor classes that I was discussing previously, and of course you can see there in the list I've got that new affiliate option. But in this particular scenario, I'm going to choose student vendor because I'm thinking I can set this person up as a student because they told me they were a student, but like I said in the beginning of this demo, I know they're not active and I know this isn't going to work, but I wanted to show you what was going to happen. So I put in a fake PID there. I think you can tell it's pretty fake. No one's got one that's called 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So this is not a real student. And when I would start this transaction, I'd fill up those boxes and I would, of course, click the Add button. And because they're not student, I get this error message. It says the PID is not valid in a valid student state to become a vendor. So it's basically, pointing you to either work with the individual or talk to an HR rep to see, why you can't get them set up. So, in your mind, you might think, okay, well, it's broken, but it could just be, they're not matriculated or they're not an active student. But they're also an employee, so I can try to set them up as an employee. So that's what I'm going to try to do now. So I'm going to go back to the same screen, but this time I'm going to choose employee as the vendor type, and I'm going to put in their same PID in that box and click Add. And that actually takes you right to the screen. So this is what you probably already expected before. This is what happens. I wasn't trying to promote myself, but I did use my name in there. But I blanked out my address and everything else. So that is a real record. That is what happens if someone, a vendor coordinator, a vendor requester on campus tried to request me to be a vendor. My information actually gets pulled from the system. So I can't change the vendor class. I can't change my name. I can't change my address. All this stuff is locked down completely. So if you went in there and you saw my address looked funky or there was something missing, you would have to contact me and say, hey, Chris, you need to go into the directory and change your stuff because your stuff's coming in wrong. And I'm afraid things aren't going to get set up. But I have to do that. You cannot do that. I also want to point your attention to the bottom of the screen, the payment method. Okay. Normally, you can actually click this little drop down and you have blank for check or you have ACH or wire, not for employees. It says essentially that this stuff is going to be fed from the payroll system and you can't do any changes to it. So once again, if I'm telling you that I really want to be paid by a different payment method, you need to tell me, hey, go talk to payroll because we actually have no capability to make those changes. Okay. So that was what some of the messages you would get when you're requesting a brand new vendor. I'm going to show you some similar messages that you're going to get when you start putting in your change requests. So, I come to you and I'm a student and I say I want a different payment method, or I come to you and I'm an affiliate and I want such and such changed. So I'm going to show you a couple examples of what that would look like. Okay, so what I'm going to do in this scenario is I'm going to go in and I'm going to say that I want to make some tweaks to a student vendor record. So I'm going to put in student vendor, I'm going to put in their PID, and I'm going to click Add. And it's going to tell me only banking information can be added or updated. Everything else needs to be through self-service on the Connect Carolina portal or through HR. So that's what I've been telling you the whole time. But now, when you're actually in the system, if you don't have my webinar handy, or you ate too much over the holidays and you forgot everything, at least now you have some messages that are popping up and you're going, oh yeah, I kind of remember they were telling me about that. I can't change as much stuff as I used to be able to change. So it will try to guide you and let you know if there's a problem or if there's something you need to do a little bit differently. So same sort of scenario, but this time I'm going to go in and say I want to make a change to an employee. So I choose employee vendor, I put in their PID, and I click Add. And it's going to tell me, address changes have to be made through the Connect Carolina portal. All changes to all the bio demo information must be made by the employees through self-service or on the Connect Carolina portal. Pardon me. It even tells me that any bank changes have to be through payroll. So once again, it's helping you out. It's telling you, here's what you can change and here's what you can't. And with employees, there's not a whole lot you can change. So you would have to get with the employee and have them follow up with that. So finally, the affiliate vendor here, I'll try to put it in affiliate. I'll go ahead and click Add. And it's going to say only banking information may be updated or added. Everything else, just like employees, all the bio demo information, they have to do it themselves. They have to go to the portal or contact HR. But remember the main difference with affiliates as opposed to employees. You can change their banking information because they're not on the payroll. But their information about them actually is in in the student system, and it's automatically fed in. And if you chose a student, it's going to bring in their information just like it did on mine when I used myself as an example. So like I said, short and sweet, that's all I really have for you today. So we actually have plenty of time for any of your questions that you might have. Feel free to type some questions in the chat window, and we'll have Anita read off any questions you may have, and either Alexa or Bob or myself will go ahead and try to answer them. So we're still waiting to hear some of your questions, but while we're waiting, I thought I'd kind of go over some of the key changes in case you joined the webinar late or had trouble getting in. Like I said, what we have gone through with this is we were talking about we have a brand new vendor type that, while not available to you currently, it is coming soon. So sometime in January when you get back from the holidays, it'll be communicated out that you have this new affiliate with PID vendor class. And the main items that I discussed during the webinar is most of the bio demo information, like address and phone number for employees, students, and this new affiliate class is going to be fed from the student administration system. And the vendor requesters can't actually request changes. The employee, the student, or the affiliate, whoever they are, they need to go down one of those paths I was outlining on the slides to make those changes. You can request changes to banking information for all vendor types except employees. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And once again, these changes aren't currently active. So if you'd like to ask a question, go ahead and ask a question anytime.
Hey, Chris, we have two questions. So the first one is, what should we do with a student who's also an employee?
Okay, Alexa, do you want to chime in on which one they should choose?
Yeah, sure. For dual, people that have a PID and they're dual, there is a hierarchy that was decided on by Martha Pendergrass, which is the employee trumps everything. So if somebody happens to be an employee and a student, you should put them in as an employee. If they happen to be a student and affiliate, you should put them in as a student. It goes from the top down, employee, student, affiliate. It will not prevent you from putting them in as a student, but we do have a process that is going to be run ad hoc that will update it correctly based on the hierarchy if you make the incorrect choice. So it's not going to be that they can't be added if they're both.
Okay. All right, so thank you, Alexa. So the next question is, when will this go live? I'll turn this over to Bob.
Yes, as was mentioned earlier, we anticipate this going in the first or second full week of January.
Okay. We have another question. So will we be able to remove a document that has been uploaded, for example, if it was the wrong document?
Bob shaking his head no. Alexa, do you have anything further to say?
All I can say is that's not changing at all from what it is right now. So if you can't do it now, you're not going to be able to do it in January either.
Okay, so not fixed in this go round. So another question, so thanks you guys for asking questions. If an other vendor, so N, vendor marked as other, becomes an employee, will the information be updated automatically and their category changed to employee vendor? Does that make sense to everybody?
This is Alexa. I won't say it's going to be updated automatically, but we are going to run this custom process at least twice a year, most likely in the beginning of January before we do the 1099 reporting, and the beginning of August after the final electronic file is sent to the IRS. So at that time, an other vendor would actually change to an employee if there was a PID in the record. But if there's no PID, which normally there wouldn't be for other vendors, it would have to be that they would contact the vendor coordinator.
Okay. All right, that's all the questions we have so far. If you have a question, please go ahead and type it in the chat window. I see that Janet Rupert's on chat as well. She's online. we're still here. We're ready for your questions. So go ahead and type in a question. We'll give it a shot.
You know you want to ask this question. Come on.
Okay, so we're going to give it like 2 more minutes just to see, unless you guys have more questions, but I did want to reiterate that this webinar is recorded and will be available on the CC Info website. And when we communicate about when this goes live, we'll also be sure to include a link to the webinar. So just know that that's out there. Oh, wait, we have another question, Kate. So I answered one, will these slides be on the CC website? And yes, they will, the CC Info website. The next question is, for clarification purposes, what backup documentation is needed for each vendor type?
Alexa?
That is definitely a Janet Rupert question. I do not control the documentation.
Okay.
Sorry, we just have a little phone noise there.
Yeah. So you know what, Janet, rather than asking Janet to type it into the chat window, we'll get that answer and post it with the webinar. So we'll try to, and any other questions that we're not able to answer. Oh wait, she did type it in. Let's see, Janet says in the chat window that guidelines for documentation includes necessary documentation is listed on the Finance Division website. So maybe we can get a link to the specific page and post it for you guys. Okay, so another question we have is, if a person is an employee or student, we still have to go into the system and add them as a vendor, even though the spaces are blocked for editing, aka they are not automatically uploaded as a vendor, and they're just verifying. Just want to make sure that that's accurate. So is that correct?
True as far as I've heard.
Yes, that's correct.
That is right. Okay, good question. Okay, another question. So when does a student applicant become a student? Great question.
This is Bob. It kind of depends upon what you call a student. So students go through a number of phases, as Chris mentioned. They become what's called in the system an active student after they are matriculated and term activated. So basically when they can actually enroll for classes. But they go through those other phases that Chris mentioned also.
All right. All right. What other questions do you have? We still have time, so please send us your questions. I think one point of clarification as well, so not all HR representatives are able to update BioDemo information, so there's a select group of about, I think the number's about 50 people, so not everyone can make those changes. So, but I think if you go to your HR representative, they can point you in the right direction. I'm not seeing any more questions. We'll give it just maybe 2 more minutes and see if anybody else has a question. Okay, everybody, so we're going to end it now. Thanks so much for joining, and I hope everyone has a great holiday season, and we'll be in touch about these changes in January.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Janet, for joining on chat, and thanks, Alexa, for joining by phone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.